hello. I'm going to assume that there are people here that can hear me. So, when you think about software development, the software development life cycle, a lot of times it seems that we always just focus on the code. OpenEdge, ABL, Progress 4GL, it's a database language. So the design and maintenance of your database, in my opinion, is equally as important as it is to managing and building your application. In my experience, a lot of times that is often overlooked. Schema changes are made, code compiles, everyone's happy, so let's move, or let's sprint on to the next phase. But if we're doing a psychoanalysis on this, being ignored is actually the worst form of mistreatment. So are you ignoring your database schema? Is your database schema suffering? My niece is an artist. It's interesting because my brother-in-law is German, so she is, I guess, half German. My dad calls her his little kraut. Anyway, so this is some of her artwork. But it's a funny story because she's 22 and she was complaining to me that she didn't know where all her money went. She only had like $500 or so. So at the beginning of summer, she had put away $2,000 for fun spending, going out, having fun, I guess, etc. So I had asked her, I'm like, well, how did you spend it? Where'd all your money go? And she didn't know. She said, well, I guess just going out. So I'm an old man, so I started thinking to myself, well, what in the world what's her checkbook? What's her check register look like? So in my mind, this is how I envisioned her accounting register. So this doesn't really tell us a whole lot, does it? I mean, we know where she started. She started with $2,000 and now she ended up with $500. So, did she spend it all? Did she earn some and then spend that? I mean, with this limited data, we can't really analyze anything. We can't find mistakes. We don't know anything about how she got from $2,000 to $500. So when maintaining our personal finances, our personal accounting, we wouldn't tolerate such a poor level of accounting. So why would you tolerate it when it comes to managing your database schema? So that's what we're going to talk about today, hopefully. So I'm Jeff Ledbetter. I'm Roundtable Product Architect. And just a little bit about us here at Roundtable Software. We have a few different products. Our flagship product is Roundtable Total Software Management System, which is configuration management for OpenEdge development. We have another tool, Roundtable Team, that just provides your version control for Eclipse development. So if you're not doing OpenEdge development, your Java development and things like that, you could use Roundtable Team. And we have a tool developed by our partner, App Solutions, called Roundtable Automation. It's for helping you do CI/CD on your while using Roundtable and using Jenkins. So that's a cool tool. I think Thomas is there. If anyone's interested in that, ask him about it. He'd be glad to tell you all about it. So in my experience, my limited experience of 20-something years, this is what I discovered when it comes to schema management. There's different schools of thought. We do nothing. We do something kind of centered around a DF file, whether we're creating it manually or automatically creating it, or we have something that is a full-featured schema management tool. So I want to talk about what each one is. Why would you choose each of these, and what are the pros and cons or the limitations of each of these choices? So one of my personal favorites, and I'm sure many of you have this favorite, is when it comes to schema management, nothing. We just make our schema changes in the data dictionary whenever it's needed. I'm sure that might sound familiar to some of you, but is that really a great thing. So what are the pros of doing nothing? Well, it's certainly easy. It's fast. There's no accountability. I mean, that sounds great, right? Just go in, make some changes, compile your code, you're done with it. No one knows who made the change. But you suffered not really a whole lot of downtime. You don't really care. You're just getting the schema the way it's supposed to look and you're moving forward. But you have no history of changes when you do that. What happens if you need to go back and recreate some prior version of your database? What if there's a mistake made? What if you have an auditing requirement? What if someone wants to know how your schema got the way it is today? You really don't have any way of reconciling the current schema with how it got that way. So that works, but it's not really optimal. Well, here's one. So we make changes in the data dictionary and then we generate a DF or an incremental DF that we check into our repository. I'm sure a lot of you do that. Well, I think that's generally a step in the right direction when you do that. At least you're doing something, right? So you're going to have a history of changes. You're going to either have checking a complete DF, or you're going to create an incremental DF every time that you make these schema changes. And when you have this information checked in, at least it does give the ability to recreate the database schema at some point in time if you have to. But there's, of course, there's some cons. It's a bit of a manual process. You have to remember, which is probably not that big of a deal, but you do have to create this DF every time after you've made a schema change. It might be the full DF, or it could just be an incremental DF, but I've seen some full DFs. A customer sent me a DF one time, and God, I think it was 200 megabytes or so. It was just huge. So, I mean, you want to check in something that big every time? Maybe, maybe not. So you can create incremental DFs every time. But it's still, even with that, it's difficult to reconcile a change to a specific project or to a specific task. I mean, you can look at the incremental DF, which may have been the result of 5 or 6 different projects. So you might have a tough time reconciling a specific change back to a specific code change or a change request or bug. It's also a little difficult to determine changes between different releases. I know that incremental DFs or DFs in general are just text files, so you can open them up in a comparison editor and you can look at it that way, but that's not natural. I mean, you're just it's almost like comparing code. If you're doing that with schema, though, it's not as much fun. And depending on how you check in these incremental DFs, it could be difficult to recreate a database for a specific point in time. If you have a dozen releases of your applications and for some reason you have to go back and recreate the schema for one from 6 years ago, can you do that? So something very similar, we make changes in the data dictionary and our automation server creates an incremental DF that we check into our repository. Well, that's even a better step in the right direction. Like the other, you have a history of your changes and you can recreate the database schema. This is being generated automatically. So the cons are still basically the same, but at least it's being automatically generated. So you're not going to forget to create your DF. Every time maybe you check in some code, you might have some process that automatically runs and generates incremental DF. If you do, that's great. So you're moving in the right direction. But still, the cons are the same. You can't reconcile changes to a specific project. It's difficult to determine the changes between different releases of your schema. And can you easily recreate? So do any of these solutions, doing nothing or managing a DF, do either of these solve configuration management issues? I mean, can you identify changes to tables and fields? I mean, for code, you can insert header comments and for a change history inside your code, but where would you do this for schema? How can you see how many times a field's been revised and what's changed about it? And why was the change made? Why did you add this table? Why did you delete this field? Why did you change this index? And what if you have to go back? What if something is totally wrong? You have to undo the changes. So none of those previous options really give you, you can get some of this and you can get it in a roundabout way, but it's not the best way. So let's talk about what I feel is a great way, and that's using some sort of schema management. What more can be done instead of just doing nothing and creating DF files? So in our opinion, if you were to say, well, what does a schema management tool look like? What should a schema management tool do? Well, these are, I think, the important bullets of what any full-featured, good quality schema management tool should do. You have to have a complete history of all your changes to your schema. You should be able to tie back schema changes to feature and code changes. You should know who made the change. You should know how does this change affect your application. And you should be able to easily undo or revert changes as needed. And it's great when you can visually compare the differences between schemas in a natural way, some sort of natural comparison, not just text files. And if you have any auditing requirements, well, you know, some of our customers have strict auditing requirements and they have to be able to show and prove everything they've done. So you need to be able to report on those and you need to be able to easily deploy your schema changes. So I want to show you how we've done this in our tool, Roundtable TSMS, and see if you think any of the ways that we've done it is better than doing nothing or managing your DF file. So let's jump into that. So our first one here is the first bullet was a complete history of changes to your schema. So the way we've implemented this, we've given you the ability to see all your changes to a database, your table, field, indices. You can see sequence additions and deletions of fields and tables, property changes, feature changes. And this is the kind of information that is going to keep auditors happy as well, because you can prove everything that you've done and you can prove how you got there. And that's important information. So let's do a scenario. So I got some screenshots here. So in this particular scene, Audrey the auditor, or Audrey auditor, whatever you want to call her. So she's been hired by your C-level executives, and she wants to. Her job is to stay on top of your schema changes. So we all know we have our favorite hero, Bobby Progress. So she's telling Bobby Progress she needs to see all the changes to the database over the past few years, and she's particularly interested in a certain table. So in this screenshot here, this is a screenshot of our application, Roundtable TSMS, and this is from our plugin for Progress Developer Studio. So I'm looking at the Roundtable database. This is actually a screenshot from our own development environment because we use Roundtable to develop Roundtable. So I'm looking at the RTP database, and we can see that is it version 15. So we can see all the prior versions of this database, and we can see all the history, the activity for this database and this particular environment and in our development environment. So if we want to see something for a particular table, we have that information as well. So at this particular table, RTBW space, it's at version 9. We can see all the versions that's ever been created of this table, and we can see the history of this table. So we have a complete change history of the Roundtable, the RTB database, and the RTB_W space table. So that's all well and good. Audrey Auditor, she likes looking over Bobby's shoulders, but she wants something to take back with her to her desk. So she said, can you give me a screenshot? But Bobby Progress, he did one better. He quickly created a report with the same information. Auditors love reports, something they can print out and put in their little folder, put in their little briefcase and take it home. So in this example here, it's the same information that we just saw on the screen, but we can see it in a report format. We can see our database and we can see all the versions with a version note for every database that whoever made the change typed in, so we can see exactly what it was that was changed. Same thing here for our table. we can see this particular table, and we can see all the notes and all the changes throughout its life cycle. This is valuable information. It's good just to know, and it's great for auditors as well. So what about reconciling a schema change with a code change? So don't you want to know why you made the schema change? If you're just looking out and seeing that a table has been added or removed, well, why? Well, Roundtable will give you the ability to reconcile that code change, that schema change back to a particular code change. You know, what code changes were made to support the schema change. So what would that look like? Let's go back to our hero, Bobby Progress. So Bobby Progress, right now, he's just trying to refactor his error handling because he watched Mike Fechner's presentation on good error handling. So he just wants to work on that. But his boss, Peter Project, he's knocking at the door. He's curious about a particular table that's been added because he doesn't remember approving the change. So he's all over it today. So once again, we see he has a question about version 15 of the R2B database, and we see that we've added a table, R2B audit, to this particular table. He wants to know why in the world was that change made. He can't figure it out. Luckily, Bobby Progress is using Roundtable, and let me jump back a screen. We can see here that this particular change was made in task 4579. So let me actually look at that task. And I can see the task 4579. I can see why we created this task, that we added some security auditing feature. We see who the manager was and who the programmer was. And we also can tie it back to a particular change request or a bug number in our ticketing system. So if we look at the description down below, we can see, okay, well, this change was made because looks like we added a new feature. We added the ability to audit security changes. Cool deal. But we can take it even one step further. So now we know why the schema change was made, but what else was made? What other changes were made to implement or support this particular schema change? Well, I can look at all of the versions that belong to this particular task, and I can see, okay, well, here are my schema changes. Then I can also see all the code changes that went along with it. So satisfied with this explanation, Peter Project, he says, okay, I'm fully educated. I'll leave you alone. Get back to your coding. I know why the table was added. Thank you. It's great information. So what about who made the change? Well, we can see who was on the task, but if we ever wanted to see who particularly made a change, we can identify that information as well. So Peter comes back after a couple of minutes because he's curious about a particular field that was in the new table. So he knows that Bobby Progress was involved in this, but he was curious who created this exact field. So what Bobby did was he goes back to this versions and task view. He pulls up the properties for this audit category field, and we can see that Bobby's alter ego, Jeff, he was the one that actually created this field. So we're able to not just reconcile the change back to the code, but we're able to reconcile the schema change, the field change back to who actually added that field to the schema. It may not always be the same person. So for this one, actually, I want to hop into a bit of a live demo because we want to see how a schema change can impact your application. What programs and classes are going to be affected by your change, and what programs need to be recompiled, and what programs need to be tested and debugged. So Bobby Progress, he's considering changing how path information is stored in his application. So he wants to put a spec together so he can give it to one of the junior developers so they can do all the hard work. So I'm going to hop over to my Roundtable installation here, and I'm going to go to my module that's containing my database schema. And let's hop down to this particular table called RTB path. So just by clicking on RTB path, I can immediately see everywhere this table is used. I can see the classes that it's used in, and I can see the database that it is assigned to. Same thing if I need to look at a particular field. So if I'm saying, okay, well, we know where all this table is used, but I'm really interested in where this path field is being used. So when I select it, I can see exactly the few programs that reference this path field. So if I'm putting a spec together, if I'm putting a test plan together, having this information at my fingertips helps tremendously. Or if I simply want to quickly compile all the programs that reference this, I can just use my smart compile feature, and I can just tell Roundtable, hey, compile everything that references this this file, and there we go. Cool deal. Let's go back to the presentation. Visually comparing your differences between your schema. So let's pick on Peter Project again. So for some unknown reason, Peter Project wants to know, he wants to see all the differences in our database schema between some release a few years ago to today. I'm going to guess that Audrey Auditor has asked about that. So he knows that Bobby Progress is going to be his best chance. But he's kind of scared to ask because we know that Bobby is probably a bit temperamental at this point. He's going to give him one of those exaggerated sighs and tell him that he'll get to it later. But luckily, Bobby has a good tool that's going to help him quickly get the answer to his question. So let's see how we would do that. So what I want to do is go to my RTV database, and I'm going to look at the history for this database. And let's say that I want to, I'm going to sort by my events. And let's say I want to see all the changes between this particular release, 12.0, to this latest release. I'm going to select those two items, and I'm going to choose compare with each other. So instead of having to compare incremental DFs, I can visually compare the differences between those two versions of my database schema. I can see the tables that were added. I can see tables that were modified because a new field was added, and so forth. And with each of the fields, you can actually see the differences. All these are adds, so it's not that crazy. But you can do that also on a table level. So if we were to go back to if we go to the RTV path, and I just do a compare with my previous version to see what was changed here, we can see that in this particular case, the path GUID field itself was changed. And so I can see that the order was changed from 20 to 5. So all this information is available, not just at the not the overall level of the database, but at the field level and the table level as well. So hopping back over to our presentation. Now we're really getting into some meat of some good stuff here. So let's have another scene. Let's talk about rolling back schema changes and undoing schema changes. So in this particular scene, once again, Bobby Progress has been deployed to fix something. We want to find out why some odd validation messages were added to the Sports 2000 benefits table. And we also want to find out why a description in the customer table had been truncated. So he's supposed to put things back the way they were before Audrey, the auditor, shows up. Now for this, I'm going to switch over to my testing environment. So let me just quickly switch workspaces. All right, so now I'm connected to my testing environment since we're going to destroy some things. Well, not really destroy. All right, so I said that we need to find out what happened to our benefits table. So I'm going to select my benefits table here, and then we can see all the versions of the benefits. So let's actually verify that there is something weird going on. So I'm going to select my benefits table and choose compare with my previous version. I'm going to use the compare tool here again, and we can look and see, okay, well, there is a weird validation message going on here. We had no validation message before, and now we've got this you'll never see this message. Someone was being funny, someone must have added that. So you know what? I don't want this validation message in here. So what do? Well, if I didn't have any kind of schema management, I would have to check out the table, or I'll have to go out to the DF, change the table, and create another DF, and so forth. So I don't want to have to do that. When you have a tool like this, I can just assign back this prior version, the one that was correct. So that prior version now has been assigned back. Now let's see what the other issue was. The customer table, someone didn't like the label on it. So I'm going to use the compare tool again just to verify that. Compare it with the previous version, and we can see, you know what, someone's right. The nice description of the table was changed, and then we had just some truncated description here. We want to go back, we want to fix that as well. So all I need to do is choose assign to put back this prior version of the table. And if we're happy with that, then all we have to do is update our physical schema just by going to the database itself. We're going to choose update, and Roundtable can figure out, hey, there's going to be a change to the benefits table. We can see it's going to put the old, that's the old, it's going to replace it with that. And the customer table is going to be replaced. We choose update. The physical database is up to date. Everyone's happy. So finally, let's talk about auditing changes. Did you do what you said you were going to do? That's one of the important things when it comes to auditing your configuration. Not just the changes are there, but that if you implemented changes to do for a specific feature or a specific enhancement, did you make the changes that you planned to implement? So with a tool like this, a release report can show you that. So my final scene, it's nearly 5 o'clock, and Bobby Progress is ready to sneak out. He's going to meet Tom and Adam at the pub for a quote unquote real beer. So Audrey just needs a minute to clarify something. She was reviewing all the new features that we had spec'd out, and she wanted to make sure that we didn't forget anything. So she asked me, did you guys make all the changes that you said you would? When she asked Bobby Progress. So Bobby quickly pulls up a release report, and he's able to point to the right page that says, look, this is the database changes we made. These are the field changes that we made. And you can see all of them, and you can reconcile them back to the actual tasks as needed to ensure that we did what we said we were going to do. Auditors love this stuff. Your boss loves this stuff as well, because you can prove that you did what you said you were going to do. So in summary, a good schema management tool, in my opinion, Roundtable TSMS is a good example of that. You can do all the things that we highlighted at the beginning. The one thing that we didn't point out was deploying schema changes, but of course you can do that as well. But most importantly though, because I know you're on pins and needles, what did Sarah's register really look like? Where did she really spend her money? Well, this is how she got there. She started with $2,000. She blew it on some overpriced sandals. Bless her heart, she had to change the tires in her car. Then she treated her friends to dinner, but she got lucky and sold a painting. And with this surplus money, she bought a bottle of Pappy Van Winkle for Uncle Jeff, leaving her with $500. So this is the level of accounting that we want with our finances, and this is the level of accounting that we want as well with our schema. So with that, are there any questions?
So far, no one typed questions to the chat or the Q&A section.
Okay. Well, then I guess it was so clear, then there are no questions, then I guess we're done then.
All right. Thanks, Jeff.
Well, thank you everyone for watching. And if you have any questions, please get a hold of me and I'll try my best to answer them.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.